What's up, everyone? We are on Cannabis. We are on the podcast network. So if you're watching us on YouTube or on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, thank you so much for joining us. And if you have those things and you haven't subscribed yet, please do subscribe. We have a great episode for you today. We are talking to Rab from Seattle Chronic Seeds. He's up in the Washington State area. So if you want to talk, we're going to be talking all about breeding. We're going to be talking about what's going on up in Washington, terpenes, cannabinoids, all sorts of stuff. We've got a great episode for you today. But before we get too far into it, I need to make a couple shout outs. First off, shout out to everyone in the cannabis community. Your support is really huge for us. It's really, really helpful. It helps get JR to events and gets JR to some grows that he's been going to recently. Those videos that have gone up on our YouTube channel, please check those out. So please join us in the cannabis community. Your support helps make those things possible. So search Cannabis on the App Store, download the app, and use the code BUZZ. And I believe that gives you 1 free month, your first month free. Also, I'm going to shout out to our friends at SacredThreeMushrooms.com. If you want to grow your own fungi at home, make sure to search SacredThreeMushrooms. Go to SacredThreeMushrooms.com and use the code Cannabis. You get 10% off, and you can get a grow kit. I think they start at around $80 or so. And it gives you everything you need and has directions and everything. So it's a great kind of foolproof method with support and great people behind it. So please support them and check them out. And then also, last shout out from me before I throw it over to JR. Shout out to Lost Coast Plant Therapy. We just did an episode with Dirk over at Lost Coast. If you want to learn more about them and learn some pro tips, but it's a really great spray for your garden to knock down some pests and help you get just a nice clean garden. So check out Lost Coast Plant Therapy, and we appreciate their support. And then last couple shout outs from JR.
Excellent. First of all, I want to say Rab is now in Oklahoma. He's been a transplant there for a while. So just to kind of set that straight. But we'll talk about the Tiki Fem line that he's dropped. Tiki has a huge fem line that he's dropped on TikiSeeds.com, and it's 50% off the entire site, and you get a free spooky pack up to the end of this month. And the other shout out I'd like to do is shop.cannabis.app. We have some gear there. If you like the shirt I'm wearing, you can get that there. Check out shopcannabis.app. And then also, I would like to go ahead and mention Neptune Seedbank. Neptune has been a big supporter and helped us get to Emerald Cup. So check out NeptuneSeedbank.com, and you can find Tiki Raw, and you can find Seattle Chronic Seeds at Neptune Seedbank as well, who our guest is today. And while we're at it, let's talk to Rab. We always like to start our guests out by asking them how they fell in love with the plant and how it's kind of gotten them where they are today.
So for me, it really started at a young age. It was kind of more the whole rebel thing behind it, just because it wasn't legal anywhere, and so it was completely different, like my relationship with it. And so kind of at an early age having, to like hide it, and then everything just kind of changed all of a sudden, and then it's legal and you can walk around. And so that really was like the point where I don't know, I realized like the plant was what I kind of centered my life around for a long time. But like what really got me into it was the initial thing of just kind of being like a rebel, back in the day. And then you just kind of started growing or finding it and trying to obtain the best. And yeah, just led on this lifelong mission, I guess, to just look for high grade herb.
So my bad on the I didn't realize that you had moved, so sorry about that.
You're good.
So how did that lead into breeding, and what kind of Can you tell us that kind of origin story?
Yeah, for sure. So for me, like I had been around it for a very long time, since my teenage years. I've always been around people who grew and it got larger. And I kind of started to, after snowboarding and having injuries, I ended up being addicted to opiates for, my later 20s and stuff. And so um, I got off of them specifically with RSO and willpower. And, it was kind of one of those things where after like figuring out that how it really worked for me and how it can benefit other people as well, that like I was like, I got to figure out, the lineages and where they came. And you start diving into the history of things. And then really it was just obtaining clones and then trying to create different lines that were different cannabinoid ratios, because I started to find 1-to-1s worked well for me. And so trying to find other 1-to-1s that just weren't existing at the time. And so I just, started buying up as much seed stock as I could. We had traveled to Canada, back and forth prior to legalization and got stuff, but like ordering hemp seed and just trying to really figure out alternatives and like how to make type 2s and then CBD dominant cultivars. And then eventually, the pathway gave to CBG and Barons as well.
Yeah, that was kind of some of the questions I had for you, because I've known you for a long time and you were doing type 1 and type 2 work before people were even coining those terms, type 1 and type 2, type 3. And so a lot of that you're saying was just kind of your own journey to a medical path.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's funny because it's like the different, it was a slow progression. So it was like it started with THC dominant profiles in the 2000s. Like we're all hunting for just the best we could find, like, the fire, like everyone's looking for just whatever the most chronic they get. And so it's just hunting. And so you kind of learn that through that time period. And then type 2s really started making with like Harlequin and like, Sour Tsunami. There was, I'm trying to remember a few of the other ones, but just some of the
Ringo's
original.
Gift.
Yeah, Ringo's, that's another huge one that was around, but just the CBD dominant or the type 2s. And I really found interest in different things. And so I really started diving into people's gear. Red Eye Genetics back in the day, like they had some really fire lines that had CBD dominant underlying profiles. And so I jumped into a lot of their seed stock. That's kind of why my work with like Cobain Kush and like medicated OG, there's a lot of stuff like back in the day, 2000, I think 9 to 13 or something, like it's somewhere around there that, I got into their stuff. But Canatonic was another one too. But it was just really getting there and then progressing like to the CBD dominant stuff, and then trying to figure out like, because the farm bill passed, and so trying to then pursue CBD dominant with little to no THC. And so you're kind of progressing down that, and then CBG variety started rolling out. And so I dove down that for quite a while, and then it went to like I was gifted a Varon cut, a 1-to-1 down from a gentleman in Southwest Washington, and it got passed around quite heavily, but it was kind of the foundation to where I did a lot of groundwork for Varon and like started to discover, the later flowering times kind of helped bring to its potential and other, factors involved. And so I really did a lot of research for the past, I think 5 years. I've been diving into Varons, and that's kind of what I'm doing today is, still playing with Varons, and then just other hunting as usual. It's just kind of looking through an eclectic variety of, cannabinoids, profiles, terpenes, like whatever I can find.
Right. Are you still growing plans for all the, because you kind of mentioned how you kind of would go down different pathways. Sorry if you can hear my 10-year-old son in the background. He decided he's going to chip in on the interview today. But anyways, are you still growing for those different cannabinoids today? I'd be because we had a question about the different cannabinoids, but I'd love if you could like also give examples of some plants of yours today that maybe I could look up that have like CBG or CBD or whatever it is. I just to kind of help me know what I could look up online and find what you're talking about.
So the THC stuff, of course, I mean, a lot of breeders, we love to work for those, you know, different lines. Like there's hashers, and then uh, I like to look for things that are kind of more old school mixed with new school or eclectic, not conventional, you know, candy gas stuff. Like I'm kind of outside the box in terms of like what I'm looking for in terms of expressions. Um, and really, to me, it's just I really just hunt for the best plant. Like when you kind of go through like this period of hunting, you know, thousands of plants, like you just get to a point where selection, you like when you start out, you're like really dialed in and you're looking at every little detail and you're trying to, you know, pick this and what's it, you know, and eventually it just gets to the point where you just kind of walk in and you're like, okay, that one, that one, that one, that one, you know, it's more, you start to see the expressions and you can just tell, I mean, on how fast there's certain categories. And so the crazy thing is for me is I'll pop, you know, a broad spectrum of seeds that have different profiles. But when it comes to selections, what I tend to do is I'll just choose the best plants. And so, and then from there, what I'll do is I'll clone them, I'll run them again and kind of see if they still have that oomph to them, or if, you know, if they lose it or if they gain speed and they look, you know, twice as nice, then generally I'll run with those plants and then I have them tested and kind of have a baseline in terms of like what I'm working with in terms of, you know, terpene. Also, depending on like varins, you can kind of play around to see like where the potency peaks. And so it's kind of a costly thing that I did for a long time, but kind of just determining like where your peak ratios and stuff are, because a lot of the times people don't necessarily know. They just harvest on ripeness of the heads. And like it's funny with like some CBG dominant cultivars, like if you just get them to where they're very milky, like that's like super peak. And I mean it's early, and that's the crazy thing is some of them will travel later, and like getting into CBG is another thing in itself, because it's like those are hard lines to deal with just because there's so many pathways. There was like originally thought to be two, and then I believe there's three. Like, and just I'm not necessarily going to get down the deep rabbit hole of CBD.
I was going to say, when you say pathways, what do you mean by that?
So I'm trying to think of how to describe it. Basically, there's just different pathways that you can breed into. And so a lot of the times, originally, there's like a CBD dominance that would take over on the next generation with CBG. So like if you were to put two CBG cultivars together, it's not going to be CBG dominant. There's another pathway. And so a lot of times what will happen is it'll show CBD dominance unless they're using like the same genetic pathway, and then they'll breed CBG dominant next generation. So a lot of times there was two pathways, like one would end up being CBD dominant, and then now there's like a non-functional one that comes and pops up according to like, I believe Oregon CBD did a test on it, and it's I'll try and look up the paper for it, but it's just something that, yeah, it explains, because I would do the CBG breeding and try to get, you know, one-to-one cultivars, and it was so hard to nail in. Like I was on a one-to-one quest for a very long time, and it was like I spent so much money trying to get it, and it was just something that was crazy. Like it was never quite right, and maybe again I wasn't selecting the right cultivar in terms like as going for the best cultivar, I might have overlooked something like that would have had that profile, you know, something a little uglier.
So that's something you really need to get lab testing on almost every
Everything,
expression.
but I mean, trying to do that on,
Is
you know, thousands of
astronomical,
plants,
right?
like, and that's what
God,
people
yeah.
don't understand. It's like even doing 100 plants, like what that's $35 a test minimal, like usually 60 if you're doing terpenes. So it's like,
Yeah.
it's a lot. It's
I can't remember. Are they able to test now for those sorts of cannabinoid traits, like pre-flower? Are they able to do that, or do you have to kind of go all the way to the end to find out the results?
Well, for like peak potency, you usually have to go to the end. You can generally determine like the genomics of a plant, like sending in a leaf or whatever tissue. You can have like a genomic report run on it, but it's not going to tell like, it's just going to tell like what all the allele frequencies are. It'll give a listing, and then generally what, you know, the dominant synapses are. And so like with the CBG breeding, it can show you physically like what pathway it's already on. And so you, if you use genomics, you can make things a lot easier. Again, it's a costly thing to do, especially doing like, it's a little more than lab testing. So.
Right.
And so, like, one of the things I imagine that is very difficult from a breeding perspective is breeding stability. And then, so also doing mass scale breeding to where you're getting consistency amongst thousands of seeds rather than, you know, a smaller pool. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, and I think it's something that not a lot of people do because like generational breeding, I think it has like a huge place in it, especially with autoflowers and things like that and achieving stability. And that's kind of the future I see of things, to where people have been really up in the game in the auto industry. And so I see kind of a big wave of that coming on. But in terms of like, you know, large scale breeding, I mean, things have kind of changed in Oklahoma. Like that's kind of the reason I came out here, was initially the licensing here allowed for not, like it was open licensing. So it was like fair game when they moved here. You literally had like, I had friends, farms that you just run as many plants as you physically could fit in a field. And now they've slowly started taking away those and, you know, adding licensing restrictions and fees and different licenses, to where, you know, having indoor outdoor with a huge canopy, you're going to pay an absurd amount of taxes. Like, I mean, the last farm I knew of that did that, it was, I mean, the bill he showed me was absolutely crazy. Like it was something where, I mean, I couldn't even believe it. And so it's kind of gone away here. I mean, there's still a few people who have outdoor farms that tend to do it. But it's harder here for sure. Like,
Do you feel like, I don't know, do you kind of feel like with the current atmosphere that it's pushing more for a black market, just like it happened in most mature states like Oregon and Washington and
it
California?
hasn't gone away is the thing. And that's what most people don't like. I mean, it's always going to be there, but I really do think that like the more scrutiny they push on people, people just are going to end up, because it's like you're already like doing licensing is like, yeah, I get the security behind it, but then like what happens with federal legalization, and you have to pay, you know, they have to do a whole nother round of inspections, and all these other people are going to get phased out. And it's like, I've kind of seen the future in terms of that. I've been in so many different operations and seen, and that's kind of why I stepped away from trying to, you know, I mean, it happened in Washington. It's like getting screwed over so many times there, and then moving to Oklahoma and seeing the same thing happen to like good family farms. It's sickening. And so it's like a lot of people end up just saying like, you know, with the leniency, I mean, fuck it. Like, I mean, they just go for it after that, you know, and that's kind of, I don't know. I see it really just progressing that market, honestly. If they keep enforcing more laws, then it's like people are just going to say, like, go ahead, let your MSOs have it, and we'll just do what we do.
Well, you know, we've experienced here in Oregon that, most of y'all, I would almost bet on anything west of the Cascades. They just straight up don't give a fuck anymore. Local law enforcement, sheriffs, all those dudes, they don't have time to care about cannabis anymore. And I'm not saying just blow it up, because if you do that, it's going to draw attention to yourself. But
Yeah.
if you're respectful within your means, you can still do okay in almost a retail market where you're not, dealing with all the other shit that people who try to do legitimate,
The
legal.
taxation, man,
Yeah, it
that's really
just
what it
kills
comes
them.
down to. Man. It's crazy. Taxation is theft.
Yeah, crazy. So, kind of as we're talking, still in that realm of breeding, one thing I always ask breeders is, um, what makes a particular variety or I'll say a pheno of that variety taste exactly like it smells? In the example of like Cynics, which I'm sure you've had that. And when you put it to your nose and you put it to your mouth, the flavor translates exactly the same. And that's not common with a lot of expressions. Can you maybe enlighten?
For
Do you
sure.
have an
That's kind of,
idea?
no, that's something that we really look for, because that's something that, like, if you talk to a lot of people, they get kind of offended almost by it. Like when you have something that tastes completely, when it throws your olfactory senses off entirely, like it's trash. Usually people will be like, no, that's no good. Like, so, I mean, that really goes for, I like to have a very common profile to how it smells, but maybe like a variation in the taste, like a little variation. Sorry, my dogs are going crazy.
The same thing. I had to do the same thing earlier. I actually we did an interview a few months ago with a gummy maker called iPoppy, and they've been making these like full rosin hash gummies, and I just got some recently, and they're doing it with a strain that tastes like it smells, and the gummies taste just like the strain. It was pretty amazing. And it's exciting to see people experimenting with this stuff, and I'm glad to hear that you're also, you're hunting for that because you find like value in that. I'm excited to see people continue to experiment with strains that come across like that, because as a consumer or an experience, on the experience side, it's just so great when you smell it, when you're rolling it up or whatever, and you roll that joint and you smoke it and it tastes exactly like it smells or whatever. You get compliments on how it smells. It's nice.
Yeah, I think that flavor forward thing is going to start kind of pushing the agenda as well. Those kind of terp wars. I think we're seeing that a lot within the rosin community, where flavor is what makes you stand out, and so
You're right, yeah.
it's super important. And the thing I was kind of alluding to is that, in my mind, I think it has to be a genetic marker, because they used to say, oh, well, if you do organics or if it's salt, or I don't buy that at all. I think it's some kind of marker or some kind of
Great.
way the genetics are passing on that flavor profile that makes it taste like it smells. There's got to be something there. I know it.
I'd be curious too what you think, Rab. Do you think or is it more of like a terpene thing? Is it more like a taste? Or
So
yeah,
yeah, there's actually, like, I think there's like what, 6 terpenes, but it starts with like monoterpenes and sequestaterpenes, and like, so having your monoterpenes, you have like limonene, you have myrcene, just it's like the basic profile, and then with the sequiterpenes, it's like farnescence and beta carry, like basically. I think beta is the only one that binds to your CB2 receptor as well, and so I really think there's just so much to the terpene profile of it, like the underlying, like how many hundreds of variations. That's why I feel like it's just a big part of the genetics, and that's why I feel like that's like our job as a breeder is to pick out the best genetic expression that translates to what you're looking for, because it's like I literally just I ended one of my last hunts and I didn't choose shit. I didn't, because like while everything was good, did it meet my standards to where I'm like the last run prior to that, I found this Melvin's times Candy Breath, and it blew my mind. Like it took Melvin's to the next level and then added some other flavor. So it's like it added a complexity and another layer to the plant that just blew me away. Like, and so that's where I really like it, is like when I have an idea of like Melvin's, like it's kind of like a baseline in terms of like what I look for. It's like hype, from the Z Skittles crossed with the one. And so you have 71 Candar and a 76 tie stick. And so it adds a really funky thing to where anyone who smells it or smokes it, they're always like, it smells kind of grapey, kind of like cantaloupe, but there's this funk, and everyone says funk that I can't describe, and every single person says it. And so it's like that funk comes from, the old school genetics. And that's what I feel like a lot of the sense that we're kind of bred out in terms for potency. It's like a lot of people overlooked the terpene profile of everything in terms of potency and like frostiness. And so it's like we missed out on a huge generation of plants that were looked through but just weren't selected. It's like some of the chems and stuff like that, they're not the best looking plants, but they smell so amazing. Like,
Yeah, Kim
I
Dog
think
number 4 was awful. I thought it looked like shit.
see, and there's just times, I mean, depending on the cut or what you get, it's like from the East Coast cut to like, reses, not so's, whatever, sour cut you get. It's like they all have kind of a weird look to them at times. They can get pretty frosty if you really know how to care for them, but it's like the smell's really what comes through, that old school kind of funk, and it tastes just like it smells, like through and through.
That's so cool. That's great. I remember that kind of back in the day. We didn't really, we had chronic weed because there was no outdoor in the rainforests of Oregon. So we would get all this random indoor stuff and we didn't have names for it. It would be like, oh, that's cantaloupe bud, or oh, that's pork chop bud, or oh, that's Christmas. And skunk is something that we, where we were from was something we were really known for. And so because I kind of grew up in those generations, I kind of lean towards that earth, funk, and skunk kind of profile. And I wonder about that as we kind of come of age to these varieties, those are the ones that are special to us. So I think Sam could kind of speak to, his relationship with Johnny's, his
From
variety that
Huckleberry.
he found,
Yeah.
Huckleberry Hill Farms.
Yeah, I was talking. That's what I was referencing earlier with Whitethorn Rose. Well, and with that one, it is a sweeter, smelling and tasting strain. So it just kind of goes back to what you were saying earlier. I wonder if like those sweeter terpenes and flavonoids or whatever lend themselves to being strains or phenotypes that taste like they smell. I wonder if that has anything to do with it, I guess. I wonder if it's
I think it's
harder.
definitely a possibility.
Yeah.
I just think it comes to term with the grower as well, and like how
Yeah.
they know to apply certain things at times. And, it just depends on how you grow as well, because it's like I've grown out multiple strains in different formats, and it's like a lot of times I do prefer the living soil stuff to anything else. And that's just personal preference, but it's just generally my go-to.
Yeah, I've noticed that, not to go too off topic, I've noticed that a lot of these guys from up north are starting to talk about how it's mixed light is like the new fire. That with mixed light or light depth type situations where you're kind of getting a little bit of the best of both worlds, that's where they can really grow like great weed. So I've seen Ridgeline Farms. That's what he talks about. I've heard him talk about that. That's how he's able to grow some really great stuff. It's kind of interesting. I had a random question for you as a breeder. So I was thinking about how JR recently, he went to a farm where they had like giant pheno hunts, and I was just thinking like, how do they keep track of all the genetics, and what happens when you maybe you didn't save a strain, but then you want to go back and bring it back. So do you find yourself every once in a while having to re-veg a plant? And if so, I wondered if you had any re-veg tips for the audience, because I've even had sometimes where I take a clone and the clone goes into flower for some reason, and so I end up kind of re-vegging this little clone sometimes. So I just was kind of curious, since you're a breeder, maybe you run into this, and if you had any thoughts or tips.
I do. A lot of times I'm really good about backing things up. And so even if when I do like a lower defoliation in say week 3 of flower, I'll still take a few things and throw them in a cloner, just in case that the prior clones that I took, if I, do something with it, 1 or 2 of them, and I, don't find them, or I get rid of a few of them, and I'm like, oh shit, I shouldn't have got rid of those. I need that one. And so I really do. I found it to where I've had to use that backup. And a lot of times for re-veg plants, the smaller is better, so they'll go faster, with less material. And it's like, that's why I find it easier to like take my cuts once they're about week 3, like when people start lollipopping or cleaning up the lowers, and then just throw 5 or 6, like throw them in some rooting gel and then throw them in a cup of water or something, and you'll usually have roots in 10 days. If you have aeration, probably you can throw in whatever you feel like in terms of like what people use. Like usually I use like a liquid calcium, some magnesium. I just do a pretty heavy dose of that, and then I have like an aloe fermented plant juice that I have a bunch of aloe plants, and so I ferment those and make an EM1 essentially out of it, and then I throw those in the cloner for salicylic acid.
That's tight. I'm gonna have to rewind that and listen to that again, because I'm getting annoyed with my cloning setup. I think is a little flawed, because I'm using the gel and then I'm putting it into an easy cloner, and with just Clonex in the res. And I feel like the whole dipping is effing up my res in there, and and also I think it might be pointless. Not sure.
Yeah, no, I think gels do have its place, but I think there's other things that you could use as well as an additive. I mean, there's also like willow extract or things of that, nature that work really well. But it's like, I mean, I have a list of things I can send you, man, that like I get really, especially in aeroponic cloners, 100% every time pretty much. But it's
Nice.
like trays, I would say, 96, 98%. That's kind of more so. Like I'll still pull 1 or 2, especially if they're underperforming.
Yeah, I'm just starting the tray process and trying to get that dialed in. Do you do any like pre-soaks for are you doing in rock wool, or are you doing in rapid rooters?
So Easy Plugs, I shout out to Easy Plugs, and if you guys please try them, reach out to them. Their product is phenomenal. Like, and I wouldn't say that if I didn't believe in it, because it's like I've used root rights, I've used every type of plug. I've had so many problems. I've done 5 to 10,000 clones at a time, and so it's like when you have a problem of that nature, it affects you. And so their products are absolutely clean. They come sealed. They come in trays. They're half the depth, and so I get roots in like 6 days. And so what I tend to do is I'll pop them out and then do a pre-soak. A lot of times what you can do is just put them in a tray and pre-soak them, but I like to put bleach in my trays and then kind of really clean everything out before, and then I'll throw the cubes back in after I do my pre-soak, with kind of the same thing that I talked about. So I have like liquid calcium, derived from eggshells that I make, and then just some magnesium from the grocery store, Epsom salt, and then the aloe EM1.
That's cool though. The aloe EM1 is kind of cool because the hormones that are in the aloe, those I'm assuming get intensified when you ferment it.
Yep. Yeah, they do. Well,
So it
plus you add
starts
a little
breaking it down and making it
microbial
more of
like,
it. Okay.
and then so the thing with plugs is a lot of time you get like algae or mold growth on the
Yep.
top of them, so you'll get a green slime. And then using the aloe, I've done this on the easy plugs now, and I'm kind of, I haven't really posted or put in your results, but it's like everything that I use with those is clean. They might have like a few specks of white, where the other ones have green slime all over the top of them, from humidity.
Yeah, I got a little bits of the gray moldy type stuff.
Yep.
And the base of the stem where it met the plug was compromised. I mean, I barely touched it and just snap. It was done. It was over.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I got, I've been doing easy cloner, for over a decade. And so just trying to get that dialed in has been kind of annoying.
It's something that I have helped. I mean, I hated it for a long time, and then now it's just kind of, it's like clockwork. And it just comes with having done it so much. Like I've taken, and now, I mean, I can do it with rock wool or whatever. You kind of, the first couple times I was a failure with rock wool, because it's like I didn't soak or didn't do the right type of soak, or I didn't water the trays heavily enough, or, it's just different in terms of how you do everything.
Nice. And so now we're talking about grow styles.
Yeah, what kind of grow style? What are you up to these days? Are you? Yeah,
Living soil beds is what I
cool.
prefer to do, just for breeding purposes, because I like to create, biointelligent or probiotic seeds, is just kind of what the coin term for it. But that's really why I do that. I also prefer the flour, just, and kind of the cost, the inputs. It's like I don't have to go out and buy, jugs of stuff. I kind of can do my own thing. And I mean, you do have to pay for soil analysis, so you generally develop a relationship with Logan Labs, and you just send in, and there's people like my friend ATG Acres, shout out to him. He will read your report and basically tell you what you need to add. And so you just reach out to wherever your grow shop that you go to or online, and grab whatever amendments you need to re-add, and you're set to go.
Are you doing? And then now my dog's jumping in too. Do you do ferments and things like that on a larger scale as well?
I do a ton. Yeah, I generally, I hadn't been doing emo collection. I was grabbing stuff from my friend OK Calix.
I've heard of him. I actually got to use some of his stuff. Shout out to Goathead. He had
Yeah,
us.
Kev's
Go
a
ahead.
good dude. He's a good dude, man. And so I've met up with him a few times, and so he had a huge collection going. He would always just give me a bunch of different emos, and so I could kind of re-amend my soil and build off of it. And then I started building boxes. So I haven't seen him in a little while, but shout out to him, man. He's a good guy, and he makes collection bundles. So if you're kind of overwhelmed with the natural farming process, like, there's tons of people who make bundles who really do it with love. And I mean, it's
Yeah.
supporting a family as well. It comes with some genetics as well. And so I always recommend friends.
So while we're kind of talking about genetics and breeding and stuff, one of the subjects that we've been kind of kicking back and forth here and on the Dude Grow Show is spectrum, and the way a lot of the cultivars that we get in seed form are bred under HPS spectrums and usually indoor settings. And so, like you say, that kind of gets passed on into the memory and the form of the seed itself. And so, would you say that when you move to a full a spectrum, a LED spectrum that maybe is spiked out in the red and spiked out in the blue and not much in between, and so it's really kind of a lacking spectrum, would you say that affects the outcome of the genetic expression?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think that and other factors I've learned, like moving cuts over epigenetics, play a huge role as well. But like switching everything to LEDs now, I've noticed that some of the things that did perform now don't, and then it's like, um, it's funny because a lot of those tend to run better in greenhouses or things of that nature, and then it's like the other ones. Some just perform better. I mean, they're heavy feeding plants that just they love intense lighting, and they can handle 1200 ppfds, and it's like, and you can keep it cranked, and they just keep taking it, and so it's like, I think that's what a lot of people are starting to breed for as well, is just plants that can handle that, threshold, and that can withstand that, and that produce within a 7 to 8 week time frame for, commercial facilities, because it's like everyone's running on a schedule. And so if you can close that down by a week and you have something like that, that's your namesake right there.
Yeah. So the idea of memory is interesting to me because I one of the strains that I grow, it flowers like super easily for whatever reason. And I've had issues like previous years with light from my neighbor's yard making it go back into re-veg while it was flowering, and it was a clone that I took and it went into flower even with like a full-on light schedule and stuff like that. So it's interesting to me noticing that just some strains react a certain way, and yeah, you just had me thinking about that. I wanted to talk to you about, well, actually, JR had a question that came up from, I think, a recent farm tour that he did. And so I'll let him take it because it was something that kind of came up in a video of his that I thought was interesting.
Well, one of the things that I found, that I went out to a farm that had basically, I think it was like around 30,000 plants in the ground. And they were doing, a lot of it was going towards cannabis derived terpene production, which, if you're doing kind of a big scale outdoory or even like hoop housey type thing, it seems like that might be a way or an avenue that you could create a revenue stream without having to necessarily dial in that super premium, flower market. So I was wondering, what are your kind of thoughts on about cannabis derived terpenes and how they feed into hash and stuff like that, or carts?
So, I mean, it's a necessity. It's for sure, especially with the cart market, like, which is a huge thing. And so, I think it's a smart move, honestly. I think, especially if people don't, they have acres to grow, and you can, also test genetics out there or whatnot. But I mean, it's a smart thing to do. It's just knowing your place and then kind of sticking in your lane and trying to be the best at what you do. But I don't see any objection. And there's a market and a niche for so many different things in the cannabis industry. And I think, you kind of have to think outside the box to really find yourself in it nowadays. And so, yeah, no, I think that's a great move in their part.
Yeah, you made me think about, there's been this controversy in California like over the last couple weeks because West Coast Cure, I think is their name, they got like all their shit recalled because their distillate had some pesticide show up in it or whatever it was. And kind of a conversation that I saw on Instagram was essentially like, people shouldn't be smoking this shit or whatever. And Elliot from Catalyst, so one of his points that I saw, it's like, I think distillate is like 20% or so. It's like a huge percentage of the like vape market. Like, so just say, like, write it off entirely and say like, distillate's BS. It's like, it's at a price point, right? And it's hits a certain part of the market. So to bring it back to the question, or like to JR's question, just made me think about that, about the value of those terpenes. I'd rather have I guess some distillate that has some actual cannabis terpenes, because I've tried the distillate that has other terpenes and it sucks. It tastes literally
Terrible.
like you're smoking one of those like flavored markers, like magic markers that you might remember from your kid. Like that's kind of what it tastes like. And so I'd rather have something that has like cannabis terpenes if it has anything like that, I guess.
And I can say, it's, if you're at home and you're in your own area, your own environment, that's cool, whatever, get down on rosin. But if you're traveling somewhere and or even like if you're on the road, you're not going to be dabbing out all the way down the road. You know what I mean? Well, some of my friends do, but
Yeah.
anyways, they have their place, and if you get the live rosin carts and you get the stuff that has good cannabis derived terpenes, I think, like you said, it kind of has a place in the market. And that kind of was kind of leading into the next kind of segment that we were talking about, is that pivoting. And so you are a person who's had to make many pivots in your cannabis journey. And can you kind of talk about some of those major moves?
Oh man. Yeah. I mean, we've had some crazy hurdles. Um, I think first being trying to deal with Washington State, and then kind of just being, overcome by regulations there and the licensing procedures and how it just skyrocketed. It was just kind of it just got crazy there. Well, so I generally had to pivot to, I mean, just, I mean, I kept things going up there, but I just kind of handed everything over and moved down to Oklahoma to try and recreate, and then essentially create, like a branded storefront and just have my own genetics. And then when all the regulations came to front, it was another thing to where, it was just, it wasn't something I can do on my own point. And so I just realized that, like, I was constantly having to change from, it's like, having the ability to do all this, and then all of a sudden it's like you're heavily restricted to just, you know, a caregiver amount or whatever, is essentially what I switched back to, a caregiver model. And so, yeah, just giving up being licensed, and yeah, I guess being, like a brand that, is recognized in terms of flower production or things as well. And so it just led me to learn my place. Like, and I mean, there's tons of people doing that, and I may do a killer job, but it's not to say, like, seeds are just kind of what I have established. And so trying to move in different faucets. Like, I mean, I've done product development, I've done, just consultations in terms of like cultivation, hash production, scalability for hemp farms, seeds. Like, I've done clones for large farms that, they couldn't get more than 20 to 30%. And so just finding what you can do in this industry. Like I said, it's like just trying to be a single person, like, oh, I'm just a breeder and that's it. Like, that mindset will just, leave you broke. I mean, honestly, it's like you have to be able to pivot and have a multifaceted course. It's like, and I mean, there are some people who do and do it well, and they have large facilities, and they kind of hit the waves at the right time, and it didn't work out for myself in that way. And so it's just knowing that, and then moving on, and then continuing why you started in the first place, and knowing, like, it's been about patience, medical, and just trying to help people. And then, like, you lose sight of that the more you get deep into the game. And so it's kind of one of those
Word.
things. It's like
Yeah,
gentle slap in the face.
so much of how we all got started and how all of the infrastructure for most of these legal states was all built on the backs of the medical people and the medical programs that got the door open to get them in those states. And then now they got these lobby groups that go around and sell this package of legalization to each of these states. And they, they're trying to fuck them out of plant counts. They're trying to squish and do away entirely with any kind of medical programs that they had established before. And so it's just this cycle that seems to be getting bought and sold all the way across our nation.
A crazy thing to me too is that even being a medical patient, you sign away your rights to bear arms and things of that nature as well. And so it it's just kind of one of those things that I firmly do not believe in. So it's kind of, yeah, it goes back to the whole model of just not necessarily agreeing with them. But it's crazy because it's like all the people who are licensed have to protect their property due to robberies. And I
Oh,
mean,
yeah.
if they're not robbed physically, then they're robbed by taxation or,
Yeah.
by the what now here we have all these crazy fire marshal has to certify it, and then now it's the DEA, I think, has to come in and do a separate certification. So you had the state certification, and now the government or whatever federal certification. It's one of those things where it's holding people up, and they're just having to shell out money to stay in business without being able to operate.
Yeah. And many of them aren't taking checks at the end of the day.
Yeah,
And the really sad thing is they're responsible for feeding families
yeah, I know. It
who
breaks my
just want
heart.
a chance to work in a legal recreational industry just like everybody else in the corporate America world does.
Yeah.
And so that's just kind of that whole kind of thumb and way to just demise and demolish, all of our movements as we cross these states and we pick up momentum. But like I said, then what they're doing is they're creating all this legislation that they economically cannot enforce. And I say continue to grow, overgrow, because that's been our mission from the beginning is to overgrow, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah,
JR, you
absolutely.
had a question. I saw this next one. I thought was interesting. You want to take it?
Yeah. So as more people are kind of coming online and getting involved with their own web commerce, do you see seed banks longevity being a thing?
I truthfully don't. I hope so. I mean, just because to me, that's kind of what we came we went to I would go up to Canada and go to Mark Emery's storefronts back, in like the 2000s, and it was just different. It had this whole appeal to it, and even the seed, having the latest drops, people would be lined. It's like back even in 2010 to 2020. I mean, the seed business was awesome. I mean, the drops would sell out in minutes. Capulator had lines around, Denver, waiting for his stuff. And it's a time that's, passed, unfortunately. And I feel like there will be seed banks. I just think the whole model in terms of profit sharing and how it goes with the breeders, it's definitely changing.
Well, the things I'm seeing is there'll be a breeding group with growers that kind of make a brand and move their seeds in that direction. And then there's also breeders who kind of just try to grind out their own situation on their own platforms, whether it's, web, internet, social media, or however they get down. And so it seems like there's either this group mentality or this go it alone mentality that I kind of see in that.
Yeah, I would say that's pretty spot on, honestly. I mean, and my hat's off to any, people who operate in a team method, because it is difficult to do in this industry. And so, my hat's off to those people, because it's I've realized, and this has nothing to do with, anyone or any sense, but just something my father taught me along. It's you're the only person who's going to support himself, and that mentality is kind of always stuck through. And so and I think it's the older, it's get it done the right way rather than, waiting for somebody to do it the wrong way and then teaching them. And so it's just, yeah, I agree, man.
Yeah. You know, and I think I saw something the other day. They say you do your 9 to 5, and then you do your 5 to 9, so that you then don't have to do your 9 to 5, and then you can make your, you know, your not your 5 to 9 be your passion and be the thing that propels you. And so
Yeah.
I still kind of hope that people in this industry and in this community still kind of have that kind of drive, because if one thing I feel like is being crushed in all of this is the innovation that we were able to create in momentum. As our momentum gets pushed and squished, our innovation staggers. And as the cannabis community, even within the science realm of things, from bro science perspectives, we kind of move things pretty fastly.
Great.
So the next question we have, this is going to be another good one too, is I saw this week that Phylos Bioscience is releasing a bunch of their genetics. And so I know that you being from the Northwest when I was, you know, that whole debacle. And so I was kind of wanting your opinion on the Phylos thing.
I hope nobody buys anything from them, in all honesty. And if they do, they definitely owe people some money. That's for sure. But I don't think, I don't know. I mean, with all the farms and the backing, I can see them maybe having one or two large accounts, but my hopes are no. I mean, honestly, those people deserve to not be in this industry after what they tried to pull. Luckily, I didn't hand anything over to them.
Same.
So
Yeah.
I have friends who talk about it still to this day. They're like, mother. And other ones who, you know, benefited. They grabbed stuff from them, and like now they have some pretty special cuts. So
Yeah, they have some, and I think I saw that most of the stuff I saw was seed stuff. It was seed stock. It wasn't even really like their keeper cuts that they were kind of offering.
Oops, I had myself muted on the podcast. I brought it up on my computer. I'm not showing it on the podcast side, but I just looked it up, and they're selling in like lots of like 50, 200, 1,000 seeds, it looks like. And then it looks like at least one of the strains that I just pulled up, the main thing that they're calling out in addition to THC percentage is like the terpene count and different terpenes. So if for those that aren't in the know and just are listening and they're like, what the fuck are these guys talking about, Phylos Bioscience, to catch everyone up, basically what happened, this is in 2019, I want to say it was, I think is when all this went down. Essentially, up to that point, this company was pitching themselves as, hey guys, send us your strains and we're going to make this really cool like visual representation of how all the strains are connected to each other genetically. It's kind of like 23andMe or ancestry.com for weed or whatever. You'd send in your weed and it could tell you like, oh yeah, this actually is forbidden fruit and it's connected to this and blah blah blah. But it seems like what they were also doing is like collecting all these great strains and trying to find traits that they really liked and maybe doing, at the very least, if they weren't ripping people's genetics, which is a lot of people's worries, right? That they were, oh, thank you for sending me this great cut of yours. I'm going to now take this. This is mine now. Like the meme. They were also, I'm sure, able to learn a lot from that data because we're in the age of AI right now where we're talking about all the value out there is in the data, right? So they've got all this data and they can make these strains or whatever they want to do. So anyways, I just wanted to kind of catch people up on what we were talking about with the drama, because it is a little bit, we're almost 5 years ago, which is kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I think with the CRISPR technology and then having the ability to do gene editing, it just puts them in a crazy, place.
real GMO.
Yeah,
Right. The real GMO, right, for sure. And so, and you get this corporate push, that's coming. And those guys, they don't have a problem doing business with folks like that. And they'll pick up genetics by the 10,000 that are powdery mildew resistant, finish early,
Right.
and look amazing, or whatever the fuck they happen to be pushing, you know. And so, you know, it's up to us as consumers at the end of the day, and as community members, to be aware of this kind of shit and make sure that, you know, we know our farmers. That's the one thing we like to say here on the show is know your farmer.
So one of the we have a time for another, you know, one or two questions, but one of the questions that JR had on here that I'll jump in with was there was some controversy, I guess, on the internet, like on grower YouTube and shit, around triploids. Like I think they, like, there was a company, I won't name them, but they tried to do like some promotion with triploids and people had a bunch of issues with them or whatever. So I know it was like kind of controversy in the community, and that's pretty much my understanding. I don't have much more depth than that. What are your thoughts on triploids? Is it and maybe you could explain kind of what it is for folks.
So basically, it's creating plants that aren't able to be pollinated, and so they're sterile. And I've seen them. I think that's why Mac One had such a big problem with people. I think it does have triploid genetics to it, but I also feel like um, it's another marketing point, you know, that people try to utilize and sell. And so there is a future to, you know, people are utilizing it. I know a few people that are they're definitely trying to breed on scale in terms of having triploids and not, you know, having things that are essentially their genetics would be locked in and then you couldn't modify them. And so I think it is kind of a wave to things. Um, Definitely not on my radar currently. It's not something that I'm interested. Like, I'm kind of more open source and I want people to be able to modify things in terms that suit them best. Like, just
Right.
like how I started breeding, and I always encourage people. It's like I always feel like once you kind of lock those things in and try and, you know, IP it, it's like yours, and it just becomes a whole, you know, corporate structure of things, and that's kind of why I you know, don't touch it.
And so while we're talking about IPing things, one of the attractiveness to breeders in Canada is that they can kind of IP their product or their work and have intellectual property. And so I'm kind of curious about your thoughts about that. And also breeding for places like, say, a foreign country that's doing acreage. Would you see that triploids would maybe be something that would be an advantage for them?
Yeah, I think that's kind of what they're aiming for, in all honesty. The whole IP thing bothers me in terms just the name game. Like, we all know that, like, everybody's got like the same strain, you know, like names, it's the same name, it's
Right.
just so and so's, you know. It's like I don't know the whole deal. That's why I tried to come up with really weird names that, like, you think, and then all of a sudden somebody reaches out to me, they're like, "Hey, I've had that since 2018 or something." You're like, "What?" Like, so I don't know. I think it's silly, in all honesty. I just kind of gave up years ago when I had, you know, something. I reached out to the guy, and the guy told me to go. He was like, "Go F yourself." I'm like, "Are you serious?" Like, it was, you know, kind of something I was proud of, and then I was like, "Okay, well, I guess that's," you know, I started seeing more and more of it. So it's just, I'd take it with a grain of salt.
Yeah. Yeah, I think people I think they try to have so much ownership of the plant. And I think one of the things we kind of push for is that decriminalization of nature. If it grows in a field or if it grows in the forest, on the beach, anywhere, and I have that human right to access that as nature, I don't feel like you or anyone else should have ownership of that. And so that's kind of one of our pushes is that whole decriminalized nature type thing.
Yeah, I agree with it.
Well, we really appreciate you hanging out with us tonight, man. And this October episode, man, the year's moving by. Um, any last questions or thoughts you want to throw out there, JR?
Yeah, Reb, go ahead and let people know what you have to offer and where they can find you, and what's the best way to link up.
So right now I'm going to be dropping some Varan Fems, I believe at DC Seed Exchange, and then some more Varan crosses at Seeds of Love, Michigan. You can also find my genetics at Neptune Seedbank. They have probably one of the largest varieties of my genetics. A lot of Varans and crosses you can't find other places. Seeds Here Now still has a good selection. DC Seed Exchange, like I said, they have a very good selection. I believe they have a few packs of the Apricoma S1s left if you're into Fems. Other than that, I'm still on IAG Seattle Chronic Seeds and not really there for the most part, posting content, just kind of there for, occasionally posting one or two things, but it's been nil and void. And so seattlechronic.seeds.com, I'm going to update the site as well. I'll have a new update here in the next week.
Excellent. Great. Sweet.
Well, if you guys enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe. Tell your friends about it. We really appreciate everyone's support. It helps us like bubble up in the algorithm and all that good stuff. Make sure to support Seattle Chronic Seeds. Check out I was going to say another seed bank, NeptuneSeedbank.com. You said Seeds Here Now, and through like years of listening to Dude Grows show, I've just had that fucking phrase drilled into my head.
Word.
Yeah. Just had
this was a fun chat, you guys.
Yeah. And then of course, thanks to Lost Coast Plant Therapy, thanks to SacredThreeMushrooms, and
I got one more.
Yeah, there you go.
We got Helio. They're a battery company, 4 carts. And we just picked up a sponsorship with them, helio.com. Get you 15% off of anything you purchase there. They have smart batteries where you can dial the voltage so you can get a super crazy hit or a super mild hit.
That's cool.
Yeah, they're really cool units, and they got some new units out. So check them out. And yeah, back to you, Q. Sorry.
Is it code Cannabis? Is that what it is?
Yeah, code is Cannabis. Sorry. Cannabis gets you 15% off. Good one, Q.
I have to look that up because I use like some other bullshit battery.
Oh, bro, they're sweet.
Well, cool, guys. Well, thank you so much for hanging out with us today. And as always, JR.
Growers love.
Peace.